All right, everyone. So we're only going to have one lecture segment today of 15 minutes. We're going to pick up where we left off on Friday, which was um, kind of a trivia question on what the most recent cabinet department was. I think it was Raquel that said the Department of Homeland Security. And so, kind of picking up that last point, like the cabinet is a tool that president has to assist them on problems as an advisor, and we looked at that in the Do Now last week. Um, we can see here Homeland Security was created back in 2002, like I said, in the wake of 9/11. But at the founding of our country, we really only had the Secretary of State, the Secretary of the Treasury, and then there was the Secretary of War um, that existed until the Department of Defense was created in 1947 in the years after World War II. So you can see kind of track the expansion of the federal government over time. Um, But let's keep going, right? We talked about the vice president, we talked about the cabinet. What other tools does the president have to assist them in accomplishing their agenda? The other thing that they have is that picture on the upper left, which is the building. If you look at the bottom left picture, which is the White House, if you look all the way over to the left side of that picture, well, extending off the White House is the West Wing. That's the corridor extending off the White House with all those with the kind of office. But then on the other side of the street of that is that big building you see in the top left picture, which is the executive office. And the executive office is obviously a big building and a fancy looking building, but it houses within it multiple executive advising departments. These are departments within the executive branch that advise the president and are important enough to need to be close, right? When you exist literally across the street from the White House, you can send members over to advise on key issues and policy making and decisions fast. And so let's take a look at a couple of these departments, um, eh, mainly the most important. So there's the National Security Council. If you are watching The West Wing, that's Nancy McNally. She's the National Security Advisor in The West Wing, at least for the first four seasons. But the National Security Council are basically high level military advisors and diplomatic advisors, former CIA agents, high level generals, basically people who's committed a life of public service dealing with the security of our country. Um, Also on the National Security Council, including in addition to the National Security Advisor and a couple key additions, there's also the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense. And this basically, these people, the National Security Council, is ever present in the West Wing of the White House. Anytime there's an event that happens around the globe, whether it's a bombing in, Kashmir in Pakistan, right, or kidnapping of an American in South Africa, the National Security Council is there to give advice. There's also the Council of Economic Advisors, and this is a three-member panel that is appointed by the president. And remember, appointed by the president needs to be confirmed by the Senate. And so these three members are, generally high-level economic players, CEOs, major business people, former secretaries of Treasury, um, major economists from Harvard or wherever, and they advise the president on economic policy in trends in the national economy, like inflation or unemployment or various other things. And so this Council of Economic Advisors, again, is on hand in the executive office, close at hand, to speak to the president on any time there's, a dip in the market or, unemployment report comes out or that's high. Also in the executive office is another really important branch that deals with the presidential side of the budgetary process, right? In last chapter, we looked at the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. We know that Congress has the constitutional authority to pass and ratify the budget. Um, And the president really has merely suggestive powers. But the suggestive powers of the president for the budget are big and important. And so they have actually an entire office, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, that's staffed by over 700 people that are tasked with preparing the presidential budget, right? The budget of the United States is a no joke document. It's trillions of dollars dealing with every agency's budget and every initiative that wants to get passed, or funding for a new health and initiative in the CDC, or just almost unquantifiable numbers of things. And so the OMB and the 700 members that work there basically spend each year preparing the presidential budget, and advising on how much something would cost, or how we could get it through Congress. And so finally, the presidential budget is released and sent to Congress as a suggestive document, and then Congress works with the CBO and to kind of make theirs. In addition to these three big ones that you have to know because they're in red for this upcoming quiz, there's also the National Trade Representative, the Council on Environmental Quality, Office of Science and Technology Policy, and so many more. The executive office is, again, that big fancy building in the top left, whose job it is to have experts in their field close by the president to advise on key issues. Moving forwards, we have the vice president, we have the cabinet, we have the executive office. We also have the White House staff. And the White House staff, you can see that top right-hand picture is the fictitious White House staff of the Bartlett administration in the West Wing. And the bottom right-hand picture is the actual White House staff of the Obama administration. Um, the White House staff are composed of people handpicked by the president. Traditionally, it was pretty small up until the Great Depression, when FDR vastly increased the size of the staff. It took it from 13 up to 600. But basically, the White House staff maintains all logistics of the office of the president, ranging from scheduling or media opportunities to communications advising. Advising meaning, like in fictitious world, Toby Ziegler and Sam Seaborn, but the White House press secretary, the chief of staff, the deputy chief of staff, and a legion of deputies and advisors and whatnot that maintain the logistics of the president, right? And make sure that everything happens. Now, within that 600, there is even a smaller segment of people. These are senior staff. That numbers, maybe 6 to 10, that are often organized in a hierarchy, with the chief of staff being sitting at the top. The chief of staff is, outside of the president, arguably the most important person in the executive branch. The chief of staff oversees all other staff, basically hires and fires people, coordinates policy run, advises the president, basically knows everything the president knows, and protects the president's time. Will delegate tasks and say, well, this is not worthy of the president's attention. I'm just going to go ahead and give this to this person out here. The chief of staff is an incredibly powerful person. There's also, in the senior staff, like I said, there's the press secretary, C.J. Craig in the West Wing, National Security Advisor, Nancy McNally, congressional liaisons, which is Josh Lyman, who's the deputy chief of staff, the communications director, Toby Ziegler. If you're not watching the West Wing, none of this connects with you. But these senior staff members are totally loyal to the president. They were chosen for that reason. They're oftentimes people who've worked on the campaign the president knows, trusts, and respects. And they provide the critical information and advice to the president. For most presidents, the senior staff are the people who are supposed to speak truth to power, meaning tell the president sometimes what they need to hear, even if they don't want to hear it. The Trump administration was pretty famous for not wanting that, but in most past presidencies, that was the norm. And these aides, these senior staff members, become very well known and very influential in Washington. They're the movers and shakers. They're the people that if you want to get to the president, if you want to influence agenda, if you want the president to act, right, you're working with Sam Seaborn or Josh Lyman or Leo McGarry or Toby Ziegler or CJ Craig. Again, if you're not watching the West Wing, these names mean nothing to you, but these are the senior staff members. And then moving on here, we also have, lastly, the First Lady. The First Lady has been a position that has varied in importance depending on the president themselves. You can see here Paige sort of grunting in the background. But the First Lady tends to have a large media spotlight, which, has honestly been a little bit frustrating at times because, while some First Ladies were maybe lower profile, let's take Michelle Obama, for example. Michelle Obama was one of the top constitutional lawyers in the country prior to becoming First Lady, right? She was a highly respected legal mind. She was a badass, right? And she sat on boards of directors. Same thing with Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton's presidency. She was on the board of directors for Walmart, and she was a major trial lawyer in Arkansas. And yet, as soon as they become First Lady, they basically get dismissed as being relatively if not unimportant, more people wanting to talk about what they're wearing or that when it's, I think that always frustrated me with Michelle Obama is just, I kept waiting for her to be like, like, bitch, do you know who I am? Right? Like she was a major attorney, one of the more powerful attorneys in this country, and suddenly people want to talk about her pantsuits, right? Her hair or whether she gained weight or something. And it felt very insulting to me, but they do have a huge media influence. They can act as key advisors on high profile issues. Hillary Clinton was famous as being the most involved in a policy and official level. She was heavily involved in various legislative agenda pieces for Bill Clinton. And just kind of reading this last part, you can see kind of the range in roles First Ladies have had. Abigail Adams was an early feminist, and Dolly Madison counseled and lobbied their husbands. Edith Wilson was the most powerful First Lady, virtually running the government when her husband, Woodrow, suffered a paralyzing stroke in 1919. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote a nationally syndicated newspaper column and tirelessly traveled advocating New Deal policies. She became her crippled husband's eyes and ears around the country and urged him to adopt liberal social welfare policies. Lady Bird Johnson chose to focus on one issue, beautification, and most of her successors followed this single issue pattern. Rosalind Carter chose mental health, Nancy Reagan selected drug abuse prevention, and Barbara Bush advocated literacy, as did Laura Bush, a former librarian. What is the president's relationship with Congress? This will be our last point for today. And, the first, I guess, the going back to the hat metaphor, right? I say presidents can act as chief diplomats or, chief legislator. In this case, when we talk about the relationship with Congress, it's that chief legislator hat. They impact policy demands as being kind of the largest focal point in government for passing and moving laws forward. They are oftentimes charged with building coalitions and organizing people yes votes and finding votes in order to pass pieces of legislation that the president is wanting. They will also exploit popular support. They will use the bully pulpit. That's a very important term that the president has. They will use the spotlight and the bully pulpit, meaning they stand higher than everyone else, and they can use that exposure. They can use um, that what do you want to say, like visibility, to kind of take their message directly to the people, and the people always hear it when the president speaks, and so they can garner popular support more easily in order to basically in order to what is it? Exercising legislative. I feel like I'm missing stuff there. But basically, in order to get laws passed, right? Even though the president has no constitutional powers to create laws other than to sign them or veto them, the president will oftentimes push for laws and work with congressional leadership to get stuff done. The only constitutional responsibility, final point, is to deliver a State of the Union. Um, every year they have to. And we'll talk about that more.